Great stories are not great when they begin. They start small. Very small. A handful of people, a few tents, a fire burning in a border village. Then years pass, and from the ashes of that fire, empires emerge. But this is more the story of what came before. The years when the fire still seemed small and vulnerable enough to be extinguished. When Ertuğrul Bey's tribe arrived in Söğüt, it was the mid-13th century. Exactly when they came, how they came, is still not fully known today. Perhaps they were swept there by a Seljuk campaign. Perhaps they found that corner while fleeing from the Mongol storm coming from the east. Perhaps they simply stopped and said, "This is where we stay." What matters is that they stayed, not why they stayed. Anatolia in those years had been torn apart. The Seljuks were no longer what they once were. The rope held by strong hands was slowly unraveling. Byzantium had left Nicaea and returned to Constantinople. With this departure, a wide belt of uncertainty formed in western Anatolia. Border lines became blurred. Questions of who reached where, who for what reason, who in whose name, all floated in the air. Ertuğrul settled into this uncertainty and never left throughout his life. Söğüt became the winter quarters, Domanish the summer. Years passed this way. Herds grazed, children grew, fires burned. Ertuğrul grew old and passed away in the early 1280s. What he left behind was modest: a tribe, a few hundred warriors, and his youngest son Osman. Osman was not like his father. Ertuğrul knew how to survive. He maintained balances, managed all sides, and stayed silent when silence was needed. This was a skill. Surviving is always a talent. Osman knew this too. But there was something else inside him. This is difficult to say. It is always difficult to describe what lies within great men. Perhaps it was patience. Perhaps stubbornness. Perhaps he simply sensed how time worked and knew how to wait. When he took over, the region was quiet. Bilecik, İnegöl, Yarhisar, Karacahisar. In each town, a Byzantine tekfur. In each tekfur, a small order linked to the Seljuks, but actually operating on its own. Between them and the Turkomans, there was a cold but functional balance. Osman's herds passed through the tekfur's lands. The tekfurs sometimes needed the sword of the Turkoman Alps. Both knew they needed each other. That is why both played by the rules. Osman did too. At least in the beginning. He got along well with the tekfur of Bilecik. With the tekfur of İnegöl, there was a controlled tension. He learned to manage the friction that arose when herds crushed crops on the agricultural lands of the plain. He waited, he calculated, he measured, until the year 1284. The people who kept joining Osman had grown his numbers, and the Byzantine tekfurs began to fear this. It was migration season. Osman was on his way to Domanish. At Ermeni Beli, the soldiers of the tekfur of İnegöl were waiting. An ambush had been set, and it was brutal. Osman came out alive. But his nephew did not. His name is not written on every page of history, but it was written on Osman's heart that day. He was someone beloved, someone trusted. And in the narrow pass of Ermeni Beli, he closed his eyes. It was a skirmish too insignificant to make it into even the minor records of history. Local, brief, ordinary. In another man's life, it would have been a wound that healed in time. In Osman's life, it broke something, or perhaps opened something. Something he had long forced himself to keep measured, to calculate, to hold in check. According to the accounts, in the days that followed, he went to Sheikh Edebali. Edebali was a man whose words carried weight in these lands. He was a spiritual figure whose influence over the Turkomans streaming into the region was great. And that day, by the hand of Edebali, the sword of the Ghazi was girded around Osman's waist. This ceremony needed to carry meaning, and it did. The news spread. Turgut Alp came, Akça Koca came, Konur Alp came. Hasan Alp came. None of them were under Osman's command. They were their own men, lords of their own swords. But they gathered at Osman's side, because Osman shared the spoils fairly. He aimed at the right target and stood in front rather than behind in battle. This was the way to rise among equals, not title, trust. In 1286, the first great test came, the Battle of Ikizce. The Tekfur of Karacahisar and his brother joined forces with the Rums of Inegol and made their move. They wanted to stop Osman before he grew too large, before he could hold on. The mounted archers determined the balance of that day. The combined Tekfur forces scattered and retreated. Osman concealed a political move behind this victory. He sent word to Konya. The Tekfur of Karacahisar was no longer obeying the power he was subordinate to. The ground for conquest was ready. And the Seljuks approved. 1288. Karacahisar fell. It was the first real castle taken by the Ottomans. Its strategic position was great. It stood at the crossroads of the routes from Anatolia to Nicaea and Constantinople. And along with it, Karacahisar and Eskişehir also passed into Osman's hands. There was now a frontier bey there who held a castle, controlled territory, and dominated the region in the name of the Seljuks. It was a small beginning, but beginnings are always small. Years passed. Osman grew. His tribe grew. He raided as far as the bends of the Sakarya, forged alliances, and his name became known. And in the year 1299, his thinking changed. Coexisting with the Tekfurs was no longer enough. If he wanted to become permanent in these lands, he would have to eliminate them, one by one. His uncle Dündar Bey opposed this, because the decision was breaking the balance. Acting too soon was dangerous. It could ruin everything. Osman did not listen. The Tekfurs of the region sensed the change. They gathered, talked, and found a solution. The son of the Tekfur of Bilecik was to marry the daughter of the Tekfur of Yarhisar. Osman and his men would be invited to the wedding. And in the noise of the wedding, amid a drunken crowd, they would eliminate Osman and his men. A clean plan. But there was a nucker. Loyal and silent. And that night the plan was whispered into Osman's ear. After that night, a silent process of preparation began in Osman's tent. 40 Alps were chosen. All were dressed in women's clothing. An equal number of warriors were wrapped in felt rugs and placed inside chests. The chests were loaded onto animals, as if goods were being transported. To Bilecik Castle. Most of the guards were at the wedding. The rest had gone to Yarhisar to bring the bride. Those inside the castle were very few. The Alps in women's disguise entered, silently, and they finished it silently. The news that the castle had fallen reached Osman at the wedding venue. The soldiers of Bilecik had also realized what was happening. Osman and his men began to flee, running in disarray. The soldiers of Bilecik were drunk but gave chase, and they walked straight into the center of the planned ambush. That same day he marched to Yarhisar, then to Inegol. Before the sun set, 3 castles had fallen. In a single day, in a single move, that delicate balance built over years had been shattered. Osman was now at the Byzantine border, directly, and he set his eyes on Iznik. Iznik was a great city, but its value lay not only in its greatness, but also in the meaning it carried. The first center of Suleiman Shah, the founder of the Seljuks, an ancient meaning for the Oghuz Turks, and for the Christian world as well. Taking this place was not merely the conquest of a castle, it was the proclaiming of a name to the entire world. But the walls were high, very high. Osman's cavalry forces would be useless before these walls. A direct assault was not possible. Osman took another path, siege. He would cut all roads, suffocate Iznik from within, and take it through hunger and misery. He had watchtowers built, strategic passes were closed, surrounding villages were plundered. İznik shut itself inside. Osman waited outside. Months had passed. The tekfur of İznik was left helpless and sent word to Constantinople. Emperor Andronikos moved. George Musalon, commander of the palace guards, was appointed. Made up of mercenaries, militia, and regular units, they landed on the coast of Yalova in the summer of 1302, and they were a force of 2,000 to 3,000 men. Behind the hills, the Turks were waiting. The Byzantine forces came ashore. This problem had to be dealt with before they could unite with the other tekfur forces. Under a rain of arrows, the militias were the first to scatter. The mercenaries tried to hold on, but were worn down. The infantry fled. George Musalon also returned with them. Bapheus, the greatest victory of Osman's life. But what was more important was this: he was no longer merely the powerful bey of the region. He was someone who had defeated the emperor's army. Those around him now saw him differently. And alongside that different gaze, another truth had become clear. Osman was no longer fighting only for himself. He was building something for those who would come from his lineage. The first stones of the dynasty were being laid, but the walls still stood. After 1305, the Ottomans advanced slowly. The Ilkhanids had sent a governor to Anatolia. A silent but heavy obstacle had formed before the principalities, and the Ottoman borders were facing the most powerful obstacles: Bursa, İznik, İzmit, cities held under siege for years, cities that could not be taken. Taking these cities was not possible with mounted archers. Something else was needed: a different structure, a different way of thinking. Osman was growing old. The illness in his foot was wearing him down. He could no longer sit in the saddle as he once had. And there was something he knew within himself. The time had come. He turned to Orhan. His son was a different kind of man. Osman was like fire. He swept people along with him. He moved by instinct. Orhan was cooler. He made plans. He thought before drawing his sword. When necessary, he spoke. When necessary, he fell silent and waited. This difference meant a great deal for the Ottomans. Sometimes a cool hand is needed to keep the fire from going out. In 1305, Orhan set out on campaign with experienced commanders. He took new castles, opened new frontiers. Osman directed from behind. Between 1323 and 1326, the exact date uncertain, Osman Bey died. Bursa had not fallen, nor had İznik. He could not see the day they fell, but he had completed something else. From a tribe of a few hundred tents, he had built a principality bearing his own name, owning land, transferable to his lineage. He had not done this alone. Everyone around the fire had a share in it. The sword of Turgut Alp, the word of Edebali, the cool-headedness of Orhan, the blood of countless unnamed others. But he was the one who first lit the fire, and a fire once lit burns from then on for itself. That wind still blows in Söğüt. The tents are gone, the fire's extinguished. But that wind still blows and knows, once upon a time, something very small had begun there. Very small and very deep. Fate or will? Which of them would carry that small fire in Söğüt to an empire? Let us meet in the comments. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe. You may also want to look at my previous video.